Okay, so dear students, having understood the concept of how the signal is detected or recorded in an NMR spectrometer, we'll try to understand what is called spin relaxation. What is spin relaxation? What is spin? Nuclear spin basically, and these nuclear spins try to go back to its original position and two different possible ways, and those are basically longitudinal relaxation or relaxation. The other relaxation process is basically spin relaxation process or a transverse relaxation process. Okay, so spin relaxation process is nothing but re-establishing the thermal equilibrium. Is called spin relaxation in general. You know that before and applying the RF pulse and after applying RF pulse, what is the situation that we have to remember and recall. So when you apply RF pulse, which is exactly matching with the external magnetic field strength, then we have the spin basically tip over the tip to a certain angle, and then it rotates the 90 degrees angle, and then it will go back later on. Okay, so this situation is something that very interesting. Uh, so in the usual case, we have more number of alpha spins. Okay, in a normal situation at the thermal equilibrium, we have more alpha spins and we have less beta spins. That is why we have a net magnetization vector. That is when before applying the radio frequency. Okay, but after applying the radio frequency, the situation changes. What is the situation? The situation is that you will have a transition, right? Under the resonance condition, you have a transition. What is the transition? So alpha spin basically make a transition to beta state. Okay, by receiving a radio frequency, it basically go to a beta spin state, right? So, so you have a population inversion takes place after applying the radio frequency pulse. Okay, so that is the quantum mechanical description. Which I have not discussed previously, but previous topic was my previous topic was mostly to make you understand how the signal is detected in the NMR spectrometer through the classical description. So, but what exactly happened after applying the RF pulse quantum mechanically is that so alpha spin basically make a transition to the beta spin state. Okay, that means so you have more population in the beta state. Okay, this situation is not a thermal equilibrium. The thermal equilibrium was you have a more alpha spins and less number of beta spins. Therefore, the transition or the process through which these alpha spin come back to beta spin come back to its original position beta spin is referred to as a relaxation process. Okay, um, that is one thing. There is another thing also happens that we will see the second category of the relaxation process. So this is only with regard to the population. So the one relaxation process is that after and before applying the pulse, you have a disturbance of the population, and this population, if it comes back to original position, that we refer to as the longitudinal relaxation or spin lattice relaxation process. Okay, and this you can understand like this. So in this diagram, what we can see is that this is a population analysis. After the RF pulse, what we have is this situation. So you have less number of alpha spin and more number of beta spins. And but this is not thermal equilibrium. Therefore, it will go back to its original thermal equilibrium. That is, you have more alpha spins and then less number of beta spins. Okay, so this process. Okay, what is this process? So re-establishing the population, actual population in alpha and beta states is referred to as the longitudinal relaxation process or the spin lattice relaxation process. Okay, I hope everybody is following. So there are two ways in which the spins can come back to its original position. One is through the longitudinal spin relaxation process or the spin lattice relaxation process. So to understand this, it is very straightforward that you have to understand what exactly happened after applying the RF pulse. After applying the RF pulse, we have a transition. Alpha spins actually made a transition from alpha to the beta spin states. Therefore, you have a different equilibrium where beta spins are more. But as you remember that the B1, that is the RF pulse, we don't apply for a longer periods. We only apply for a shorter durations, and afterwards it will be switched off. Once you switch off, these pins will try to go back to its original population distribution pattern. So that is something what we call it as a longitudinal relaxation process. Okay, so we can picturize this situation in a through the classical way. Well, so this is the classical picture that will help us to understand the relaxation process. Okay, you have, so this is where you are applying slowly, you are applying RF pulse. So naturally this net magnetization vector which is pointed towards the z-axis actually comes to this particular plane, that is xy plane, and then it rotates. Okay, but then the moment you switch off, okay, so then it go back to its original process, right? So it is going back to its original process. This process or the re-establishing this particular thing, what we call it as a spin lattice relaxation. Okay, you have magnetization rotating in the xy plane, going back. So this relaxation, what we call it as a spin lattice relaxation. And there is another relaxation. Well, I think we should see a little more about the spin relaxation. So the spin relaxation is caused by local magnetic fields which can arise from the tumbling motion of the molecules in the fluid sample. Okay, what is tumbling motion? Tumbling motion is you can think of like a complex motion. Well, you can molecule rotates, molecule vibrates, molecule make a transition. So there are all together, all these type of motion together, what we call as a tumbling motion. So the tumbling motion is something that is always there in the fluid sample. I mean, normally NMR spectrum is done in the liquid states. Okay, of course we do have the solid state NMR, but in the NMR, normal NMR situation, we have more number of, you have the problem of the tumbling motion. This tumbling motion actually is something that can contribute to the spin lattice relaxation. Okay, so why this is said lattice relaxation? The spins actually, because of the lattice is nothing but the surroundings. Because of the surrounding effect, the spin can go back. So the surroundings actually dictates how fast the spins come back to the original position, or how slowly they basically come back to the original position. Therefore, instead of calling only the longitudinal relaxation, is also referred to as the spin lattice relaxation. The longitudinal relaxation term was basically based on the concept of the net magnetization vector parallel to the z-axis. The spin lattice relaxation name was actually based on this concept. What is this? The spins basically interacting with the surroundings. The surroundings, what we call it as a lattice, and this lattice can decide or dictate or contribute to the spins, how fastly they go back to the original position. Okay, suppose if the molecular motion is too slow or too fast compared to the resonance frequency, it will give rise to a fluctuating magnetic field with a frequency that is either too slow or too high to simulate the spin change from beta to alpha conversion. Therefore, T1 will be short. Okay, Are you understanding? So the concept, the point, what I was telling, if it is too slow, tumbling motion, okay, so the molecule, the tumbling motion is too slow or too fast compared to the resonating frequency of the frequency, then what happens is that the fluctuating magnetic field with a frequency that either too slow, too high, will not contribute too much, will not effectively it will contribute, okay. And then the T1, okay, T1 is the relaxation time that it takes to go back to the original position, okay. And that will be very long, okay. And if T1 will be shorter if the molecule tumbles at an about resonating frequency due to the effective induced spin changes, fluctuating magnetic field. Well, you can understand there are two situations where the tumbling motion decides the time constant, the longitudinal time constant, okay, or the spin lattice relaxation constant. And if the tumbling motion is too fast or too slow, okay, it will not simulate the spins to go back to original positions. On the other hand, therefore the T1 will be longer and T1 will be shorter if the tumbling motion is nearing about the resonating frequency, I mean the Larmor frequency. Okay, so in that case T1 will be shorter. Okay, so as you know that the tumbling motion, what exactly governs the tumbling motion? Well, the temperature is one and also viscosity is the one. If the temperature increases, the tumbling motion will be too rapid, therefore T1, which is the spin lattice relaxation time, which will be very long. And if the viscosity is basically lowered, then again the tumbling motion will be higher. Therefore, therefore, in that situation also T1 will be longer. Okay, only when T1 will be shorter if that basically matching with the tumbling motion matching with the resonating frequency of the spins. Okay. So this is the reason that we call the relaxation process, since it is involved giving up energy to the surroundings. So therefore, it is also called a spin lattice relaxation process. Okay. So how you can just simply understand, you have alpha spins, okay, and beta state, you have certain population, alpha spin certain population. After applying the radio frequency, you have more betas and less alpha. Alpha is the lower in energy, beta is the higher energy. Now, how do you think how these spins basically come back? Because this is not a actual equilibrium. This is it's not actually equilibrium. Therefore, they will come back. They will come back by giving the energy to the surroundings. Okay, the excess energy, anything that a system is having, it will try to dissipate it to the surroundings. Therefore, it will come back to the ground state, that is the equilibrium state. That is the nature, right? That is the nature. So nature likes a system to be at the ground state. So alpha state, more spins is the actual scenario. Therefore, beta spins will try to give their excess energy to the surroundings and come back. That is another explanation why this is called as a spin lattice relaxation. And the another relaxation process which I have said was the spin-spin relaxation or transverse relaxation. Okay, the spin-spin relaxation or transverse relaxation. It is basically a randomization of spins. Okay, randomization of spin directions. In other words, T2 is the phase coherence among the nuclei. Okay, please remember T1 is the time constant time constant of the spin lattice or longitudinal relaxation constant. Likewise here T2 is the spin relaxation time. Okay, so here this particular thing we can easily understand. It is the randomization of the spins. Randomization of the spins. What do you mean by randomization? Well, to understand this, again, you have to go back to this. Okay, at the resonance condition, what happens is that even though I have showed the net magnetization vector, but in principle, we don't have one particular thing. Basically, all the spins, you will have so many spins, and all the spins will be rotating in a xy plane. Or sorry, in the together, it's like a bunch of spins. They'll be rotating. Okay, they will be rotating a bunch of spins after applying the radio frequency. But actually, at the equilibrium, if you see in the the applied magnetic field, the spins are basically randomly oriented along a cone. Okay, if you just recall the first slide or second slide of today's discussion, please remember that. At the equilibrium position, you have the spins, individual spins. They are actually oriented different directions on a cone, right? This is the actual equilibrium position. Okay, but this actually changes. This scenario changes when you have applied the radio frequency pulse. When you apply the radio frequency pulse, what happens is that you have different spins. These spins become a single spin. Okay, so they basically rotate like all together. They basically rotate in the xy plane. Okay, so that is something that related to the spin relaxation. Okay, and that is what I am referring to the randomization. Okay, randomization is the actual equilibrium scenario. Okay, at the before applying the radio frequency, so the individual spins are actually different direction on a cone. They are pointing along the z-axis or the applied field, magnetic field. But after applying the thing, all together as a bunch, they basically precess as a bunch. It's like, you just imagine you have different sticks, and then you bunch together, and together they will be precessing in the xy plane. But that is not actually equilibrium, right? After stopping the radio frequency, they will go back to it's a randomization. So that is what I mean. And again, this process uh, go through will be an exponential phenomena. And if you try to measure the magnetization component along the y-axis, okay, the along the y-axis, basically it basically follow the exponential path, and the time it is taking to go back or to randomize all the spins is referred to as the transverse transverse relaxation time constant T2. And this T2 is very much interesting and very important to know us. And this is what I was trying to refer. Please remember the population difference here, it doesn't change. Before and after this thing, unlike the previous case, here alpha is not coming back to beta, beta is not coming to alpha. Here it is only, randomization. So this energy is very negligible. Therefore, the population actually doesn't change in this case. Okay, so direction, they remain same. Okay, so here, so the population alpha and beta before and after applying the radio frequency pulse, they will be remaining same. So nothing happens. And here you can see this. This is what I was talking about. As a bunch or together, they precess in a particular plane. When you apply 90 degrees, this will precess in a. Okay, suppose if you initially they all together they were actually randomly oriented along the cone, and then they were rotating. But after applying the radio frequency pulse as a bunch together, they precess in a particular plane. Okay, now after stopping the radio frequency pulse, which is generally is the case, once you apply for an about 10 to 12 microseconds, then the pulse is stopped. So once the pulse is stopped, since then they were together rotating, but then they now try to go back to their original position, that is their, they will try to reorient along different directions of a cone. That is the actual thing. So this process, what is referred to as a randomization of individual nuclear spins or losing phase coherence. Okay, so the technical words are these, and then coherence. So coherently they are moving as long as the pulse is on. The moment the pulse is off, then the phase coherence will be losing, and then they will go back to zero position. Okay. Okay, I think we will see these topics maybe tomorrow. There are a couple of things that I have to cover. I think all the discussion what I have said was this, and two more topics I have to cover here. So how to measure T1 and how to measure T2 I will discuss in the next class. Okay, so there are ways that we can measure or estimate the spin lattice relaxation constant. Similarly, there is another way that we can measure the spin relaxation uh, constant, okay, T2. So both we can measure experimentally. So this we will discuss, and we will try to understand the line width, NMR line widths, and then we will go to the chemical shift in NMR. Okay, that's how we will proceed. And for today, what we discussed was what we discussed just now, and the today class is this. We have majorly discussed how the NMR signal, one can actually understand how the signal is being detected by the NMR detector. Okay, so the classical description and little bit of quantum mechanical description, both I have tried to give. Later, we have tried to understand in this class the spin relaxation. What do you mean by relaxation? Relaxation is nothing but the re-establishing the equilibrium. Actual equilibrium is broadly known as the relaxation. There are two different ways in which the relaxation taken place. One is the spin lattice, and then spin relaxation processes. The time which is taken for each relaxation process is referred to as that particular time constant. If it is a spin lattice, then the time it is taken to basically spin lattice time constant is T1. It is also nothing but the broadly it is also nothing but re-establishing the population between the two nuclear spin states. Okay, that is alpha spins is more, and then beta spins is less. That is the thermal equilibrium. So after applying the pulse, you have a different ulta or reverse population scenario that will be changed slowly, and this process basically follow an exponential curve, and then that particular the time it is taken for relaxing back to its original position, what we call it as the time, that spin lattice or longitudinal relaxation time. Similarly, the spin relaxation time or the transverse relaxation time T2 is nothing but the randomization or the losing the phase coherence. Okay, so after applying the pulse, generally all the nuclear spins they combine together as a bulk bunching. They bunch together as a bunch. They try to precess in a particular angle based on the pulse, based on the type of the pulse that you apply. Then later, once the pulse is stopped, then naturally they will try to go back. That is, the go back the original position. That is nothing but the randomization of the individual spin, and they will try to reorient to the like previously before applying the radio frequency pulse. So these things you try to understand. Well, I think there are 2 points here I just now come to know. Any relaxation process that changes the balance between alpha and beta will also contribute to this randomization. Okay, so normally the T2 will be always less than T1. So any small change or imbalance, small imbalance between alpha and beta spin state will contribute to this randomization. So normally it is the case that, you know, you have more, the T1 will be more and then T2 will be less. Okay, and in terms of the tumbling motion, you can always understand, and if the molecular motion slow, if it is slow, then it will actually leads to T2, a short T2, because and then faster motion correspond to longer T2. Why? Because you know, if the molecular motion is too slow, I mean, molecular motion in the sense the tumbling motion, if it is too slow, then what happens is that the spins get enough time, then they basically try to randomize quickly. On the other hand, if the tumbling motion is very fast, then what happens is that the the spins actually experience different inhomogeneous inhomogeneity. So that means in the nuclear magnet, it is related to the nuclear magnet inhomogeneity, which means is that even though we are applying a 1 Tesla magnetic field to all the nuclei, because of the actual inherent property of the magnet, it will not be exactly at 1 Tesla. So all the thing will not precess at 1 Tesla. It will be slightly different. So there will be plus or minus. So okay, so that is what is referred to as the magnetic inhomogeneity. So certain nuclei will precess at a frequency which is slightly different than the other nuclei precessing in the same place but located in different place in the sample. So that is called the magnetic inhomogeneity. So this magnetic inhomogeneity actually broaden the signal, right? And this is actually related to the NMR line width also. We'll see in the next class. But what I wanted to tell you is that if the molecular motion is too slow, then what happens quickly, the randomization takes place. Therefore, the T2, that is the spin relaxation constant, will be short. On the other hand, if it is too fast, then the molecule will try to bunch together for a longer time because because of the fast change in the magnetic field, local magnetic field. Okay, please remember that this is called local magnetic field will be slightly different. It is not too much variation, but slightly different. And that slight variation, what we call is a magnetic inhomogeneity. So because of this bunchingness, so as a bunch, they are together processing. This bunchingness will be there for a longer time, and then naturally, the randomization doesn't take place as we expect. So it will take relatively longer times. So that is what it is. Okay. And on the other time constant, probably you may recall that the spin lattice relaxation constant usually will be shorter only if the tumbling motion is matching with the resonating frequency of the nuclei. If it is too slow or too fast, then that will be longer. Okay, so T1 will be longer. Likewise, here the tumbling motion too slow will contribute to shorter spin relaxation time constant, and too fast tumbling motion or the molecular motion causes the longer T2. So with this, we will try to conclude here, and if you have any questions, please ask. Otherwise, we will end up for today.
Sir,
Thank you for listening.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, why there is no population difference after spin relaxation
Why there is no population difference?
between alpha and beta?
No, this is not actually a population. See, the population, what should I say? Randomization, it is just a small phenomenon. Okay, so the spins are arranged in the same direction as before. There is no difference, but only thing is that bunchingness. Okay, so they are together. They were together rotating. I mean, precessing. That is the only thing. So that is nothing to do with the population. In the previous case, when you have a situation, when you apply the radio frequency pulse and at the resonance condition, you have a transition. Alpha becomes beta. Alpha becomes beta. So you have a more beta spin state. So naturally, that has to come back. That is wherein the spin lattice or longitudinal relaxation time constant came in. So that is understood. But here, it is not related to population. It is just the spin's alignment in a direction, randomization, or the losing the phase coherence. Here there is nothing called a transition. So there is no transition involved in this process. If there is a transition involved, then it could have been reflected in the population. But that population difference already taken care by the other relaxation process.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. We have only one population variation after applying the radio frequency. Okay, that is alpha to beta. That is taken care by the one relaxation. So naturally, the other relaxation will not involve in this process. Anybody, if you have any questions, you can ask me.
No, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, is the net magnetization vector characteristic of each nuclei?
Characteristic of?
Each nuclei.
Yeah, naturally. Yes, naturally, the net magnetization depends upon the type of nuclei that you are studying.
Okay, sir.
So that particular discussion only just to understand how the signal is being recorded. But in principle, we don't have a situation like there is one magnetization vector or something like that. It's just an illustrative. But in reality, we don't have a vector which is called net magnetization vector. No, we have what we have is a individual spins. But these individual spins are, there is imbalance between these individual spins, pointing and then opposing spins. That is what leads to the net magnetization vector. But actually, there is nothing like that, isn't it? We don't have any spin that is called net magnetization. Because of the imbalance only, that is something that we have introduced to understand the concept. Any other question, please? Good afternoon, students. In the last class, we have learned about the spin relaxation process. Spin relaxation process is nothing but re-establishing the thermal equilibrium. And for your kind information, thermal equilibrium is nothing but when you place the magnetically active nuclei in the external magnetic field. So we have the alignment with respect to the field direction, and then these individual nuclear spins also arranged in a particular cone, and then they basically precessing at the Larmor frequency. So that is the thing. And then in terms of the population, then we have more alpha spins as compared to the beta spins. So this is the thermal equilibrium. And after the application of the pulse, radio frequency pulse, then this scenario changes. Okay, it changes to the alpha spins which originally was more, this number will be reversed, inverted, and you will after the pulse you have beta spins more and then alpha spins are less. And moreover, what happens is that the individual spins are actually bunched together just after the pulse application, and then they will be rotating in the XY plane. Okay, if you have applied the 90-degree pulse, so they will be rotating as a bunch, they will be rotating in a XY plane. Okay, so this is not a actual thermal equilibrium, because this is actually created because that we have applied the pulse. Okay, if the RF pulse is not there, then this situation doesn't arrange. Okay, so naturally you know that beta spin nuclear spin state is higher in energy. Okay, a system doesn't want the higher energy, so it tries to be always the lower energy state. So it has to come back naturally. So once you switch off the RF pulse, then naturally this process will re-establish. The original process or the thermal equilibrium will slowly re-establishes. Okay, so this process, what is referred to as the spin relaxation process. Okay, the relaxation taken place in generally takes place in two different ways. One is the longitudinal relaxation process, which is also called spin lattice relaxation. In this process, the individual spin population will be re-established. Okay, so the beta spins will try to beta spins actually originally after the pulse beta spins are more, so it will try to go back. That means the alpha spins will be I mean most of the alpha most of the spins will occupy the alpha spin state as compared to the beta spin state. So this process of the population inversion into the original population is referred to as this longitudinal relaxation. Okay, and since this relaxation involves in the lattice, okay, the excess energy, any state or any excited state, the molecule, they try to dissipate their energy in various means, and then they try to come back to the original state in order to have the thermal equilibrium. So one way of dissipating the energy, excess energy, is just to give the energy to the surroundings. So naturally here also it happens, since we are going to record the NMR spectrum in the in a liquid phase. So the excess energy, which actually originated because of the pulse application, will try to dissipate, will try to distribute to the surroundings, and then it will come back to the original state. Okay, so re-establishing the population happens through dissipation of energy to the lattice. Lattice is nothing but the surroundings. That is why people also call it as the spin lattice relaxation. And the second relaxation is spin-spin relaxation. So originally we have the different direction. These nuclear spins are actually aligned with respect to the field, and then they are precessing along a cone with in a different directions. So this is the thermal equilibrium. But then after the pulse, the situation changed, where you have as a bunch of all together as a bunch. So they will be precessing in the XY plane. So this has to go. This is not the thermal equilibrium. So this has to be modified to the original state. So this happens through spin-spin relaxation process, and then the time that it takes, it is the T2. It is the time it is taken to come back to the original state is measured in terms of the time constant, that is T2, and the previous one, spin lattice or spin longitudinal relaxation process, time constant is T1. Okay, so with this background, let us move on today for today's class. And today class, I wanted to tell a few more things about spin relaxation, and in the second part of my discussion today will be the chemical shift. And look at this transparency. What you see is another way of looking at the time constant, the spin lattice time constant T1 and spin lattice constant T2. Okay, so if you just imagine T2, just for your understanding, this example is given. Just a T2 can be thought of like, you know, the time it is taken for a stove to heat the house. Okay, that is T2, and T1 is the time that it takes for the heater, that it takes for the heat to dissipate to the surroundings. Okay, so naturally, in general, so if the system is open and all, so normally T1 will be longer and then T2 will be shorter. If the system is insulated, then we will see a different situation. Okay, and how do you correlate these things in an actual molecule? Well, in the actual molecule, what we have is we don't have only a single type of nuclei, magnetically active nuclei, but rather we have, most of the cases, we have several number of magnetically active nuclei are there. Okay, so this you can relax it like, you know, a relaxation between a 13 carbon and proton in a molecule, if that is happening, within a molecule, if that is happening, then that you can say it is an intramolecular relaxation, that is T2. And suppose the 13C and then the proton from the solvent and the if both are actually interacting, okay, relaxation between 13C and the proton from the solvent, if they are involved in the process, then such a process broadly is referred to as the intermolecular relaxation, which is denoted with the T1. Okay, so one is intramolecular and then the other one is intermolecular. So intra and intermolecular relaxation process that generally happens, and then this is actually related to the spectral line width that we will see. And then with this we will try to understand how these relaxation time can be measured. Are there any ways that we can actually measure these time constant? So why we have to measure? There is a simple answer that these relaxation times are directly related to the spectral width. Okay, that means spectral width actually related to the resolution of the NMR spectrometer. That is why these things are important to us. And then, there is a well-established technique for measuring the T1, and that technique is called inversion recovery technique. Inversion recovery technique is the technique generally used to measure the longitudinal relaxation time constant or the spin relaxation time constant. Okay, in this method, normally what we do, a 180-degree pulse is applied to the sample in the first step. Okay, so if you apply 180-degree pulse, what exactly happens is that the magnetization vector, the net magnetization vector, basically will be pointing towards the negative Z direction, and then it will be precessing. Okay, so as long as the pulse is on, then basically it will be precessing in the negative Z direction. Okay, so that's what happens. How do we apply pulses? Different type of pulses that we have discussed in the previous class, and please refer those discussions. Okay, so there are different ways that you can apply 90-degree pulse. A B1, okay, B1 can be applied twice the duration of the actual 90-degree pulse. For actual 90-degree pulse, normally it takes roughly about 10 to 12 microseconds. Then if you can double the timing, then that situation, the net magnetization vector will be pointing along the minus Z direction, and it will be precessing in that direction. Okay, and now if you are trying to measure the XY plane, the magnetization in the receiving coil, you don't see anything. Okay, but then as you know that any pulse, we don't keep it for a longer time. Once we apply and then we leave it, we apply for a certain duration and then we leave it. Once you leave it, then naturally it comes back to original position, right? So this process actually, it follows an exponential pathway, and then in fact it touches the zero time also, and then it will be once it reaches the XY plane, then the detecting coil or the receiving coil start recording the signal, and then it basically slowly emerges in the XY plane. Accordingly, the signal also emerges in the XY plane. Okay, so the moment in this actual experiment, the first step, as I told you, it is 180-degree pulse, and then if you just leave it, then slowly it decays and then it reaches to the origin, the XY plane, and then it will again grow in the Z direction. Okay, then after certain delay, what happens is that normally, so with a certain delay gap of the original pulse, 180-degree pulse, then a 90-degree pulse is applied. Okay, a 90-degree pulse is applied, and slowly the net magnetization vector actually slowly growing in the XY plane, and accordingly the signal also will go exponentially. Okay, so if you try to fit that exponential curve, so the fitting actually gives you the time constant. Okay, so this we can picturize this, what I have explained in this particular diagram, you can see here. So you can apply a 90-degree pulse, 180-degree pulse. You see, originally you have the net magnetization vector pointing z direction. As you can see here, the net magnetization vector actually pointed positive z direction, and then if you apply a 90-degree pulse, then what happens, that basically this net magnetization vector pointing along minus z direction, right? And please remember, this is our x-axis and then this is our y-axis. There are two other directions as well. And if you just leave it, after applying the pulse, if you just leave it, then basically it takes an exponential path. Okay, it slowly come back to original position. Original position is nothing but this one. Okay, but in the inversion recovery technique, then what is done, with a delay of a tau is the delay, with a delay of from the application of the first pulse, 180-degree pulse. So a 90-degree pulse is basically applied. Once you apply it, then 90-degree pulse, what it does? The 90-degree pulse actually, it basically try to push or tip the net magnetization vector along the xy plane, in the xy plane, and then it basically presses. Okay, so originally the net magnetization vector, it is negatively, it is here like this, and then if you try to apply the 90-degree pulse, the job of 90-degree pulse is basically it will try to tip the magnetization vector to the xy plane, and then it will start precessing. So if you have a magnetization vector in the that is precessing in the xy plane, subsequently we will see a signal in the receiving coil, because it is a magnetization vector, and then if a magnetic field is changing with respect to time, appropriate current can be absorbed in the receiving coil. That is the fundamental principle involved in measuring the signal or identifying the signal in NMR spectroscopy. Okay, so in the inversion recovery technique, just apply 180-degree pulse and then give some delay, and then again you apply the 90-degree pulse. So, and then each time you apply 90-degree pulse, okay, 90-degree pulse in each experiment, you have to apply a 180-degree pulse, and then with a delay you just record the signal in the xy plane. Okay, and then in another experiment, just apply 180-degree pulse and then give a delay, and then you just again record the xy plane signal, right? So xy plane, if you have anything magnetization, any magnetic vector, if it is rotating in the xy plane, that basically gives a FID, free induction decay, that gives you a signal. Okay, so this entire process is repeated for several times for different time delays, and then what you see is this behavior. What is this? You can see there is a blue curve, or I'm redrawing that. This actually follows an exponential, as a result of which appropriate signal strength is also shown here. Okay, the signal strength is exponentially, it is growing, and as you can see, it is exponential curve, and if you try to fit that curve, basically it gives the time constant, and that time constant is nothing but the longitudinal time constant, or the spin lattice time constant. And please remember that why it is called inversion recovery technique. So we are actually inverting the net magnetization vector by applying 180-degree pulse. That is the reason why there is a term called inversion and recovery. So basically, after applying the 180-degree pulse, we are trying to recover the signal in the xy plane. It is slowly growing, right? That is why it is called as an inversion recovery technique, and it is in this fashion basically we can measure the T1. Okay, what about T2? Well, T2 also can be measured, but then by using different pulse sequences it can be measured. But what exactly causes the T2? T2 is nothing but the spin-spin relaxation or the transverse relaxation process. It is connected with that. Now it is broadly what we have discussed is that it is the randomization of the individual spins. And we also given certain information like if you have this this is broadly because of the issue that the inhomogeneity of the magnetic field. Okay, the transverse relaxation mainly comes because of the magnetic inhomogeneity. So inherently what happens, there is something called local magnetic field. Even though we are applying a particular 1 Tesla, 2 Tesla or 5 Tesla, whatever the magnetic field, within the sample, everywhere across all the sample region in the microscopic level, so we don't expect everything to be precessing at the same frequency as you have applied the magnetic field. So local magnetic fields are slightly different than the actual applied magnetic field. So this is actually leads to the process, leads to this transverse relaxation process. Okay, so this relaxation time constant can be measured by spin echoes, by measuring the spin echoes from these uh, individual spins. Okay, how we record it? It is basically shown in this diagram. You can see here. In the first, the pulse sequence is that in this particular spin echo technique, you know, I'm sure that most of you know what is the echo. Echo is the overlapping of two frequencies, right? So if it is audio, then we can basically observe an echo, very louder sound, right? So similarly, the two frequencies of the radio frequencies can also be combined together, where we can observe an echo. That is also possible. And in this technique, normally we have the net magnetization vector in the original position, which is pointing along the z direction. This you can apply a 90-degree pulse, let it rotate in the xy plane. Okay, once you apply the 90-degree pulse, it starts rotating in the xy plane. Then, you know, now what happens? So they will be, as a bunch, they will be rotating initially. As a bunch, they will be rotating. But then after a certain time, what happens is that because of the inherent property, that is, and also because of the magnetic inhomogeneity, certain spins will precess little faster, and certain spins precess with a slightly slower rate as compared to the other ones. Okay, now this is shown here. You can see that after certain delay, so once you have applied 90-degree pulse, and this is the red, basically indicates the net magnetization vector. Now it is precessing in the xy plane. But when you give a delay, that is tau is the delay that we are giving. That means you wait for some time and then watch out what is happening. So when you watch out what happens, because of this inherent relaxation process, certain number of spins basically precessing slightly faster as compared to the other ones, and certain things are in moderately. So you have basically a broad range of spins. Okay, there are spins which are rotating or precessing with a slightly higher frequency than the applied Larmor frequency, and there are certain frequencies which are basically precessing slightly lower than the Larmor frequency, right? So this basically gives rise slower spins and then faster spins. Now under this condition, then you can apply a 180-degree pulse. Okay, under this condition, if you apply 180-degree pulse, what exactly happens is that the slower ones becomes the faster ones, and then faster spins basically becomes the slower ones, because there is an inversion happens. So please remember that whenever you apply 180-degree pulse, the inversion takes place. So the ones which are moving very fast, they will come back. Okay, they will be precessing with a slower rate, whereas the ones which are precessing with a faster rate, they will be, come back. They will slow their precisional frequency. So this is exactly happens here. Okay, now what you do is that once, just after applying the second pulse, that is 180-degree pulse, you just wait and see in the receiving coil. What you see is that you have a faster one and you have a slower one. Okay, but their original thing is, originally the faster, originally here you can notice here, slower spins are here and then faster spins are here. I mean faster in the sense moving with a fast rate. Okay, so moving with a fast rate spins are here, moving with a slow rate spins are here. Now after applying 180-degree, faster spins are here and then slower spins are here. Okay, so just for illustration, I have taken only two, but then it doesn't mean that only we have two. So we have a distribution of spins. Okay, so ranging from fast and then slow. Okay, now if you just leave out the system at this stage, what happens is that originally we have a slow spins are here, right? So this will try to go back. At the same time, this will also try to go back. Okay, basically they will try to go back to their original position during this process. So they are basically moving. One is moving this way, the other one is moving backward. Forward and backward, both are moving. Whenever they just touch here, then you will see echo. That echo is basically detector. Okay, so in this experiment and the spin echo technique, so the pulse, 90-degree pulse is applied, and then after that 180-degree pulse is applied, and then with a delay of some time, so we have to apply 180-degree, and then later on when you leave it, then we will see echoes. Okay, this experiment you can repeat it and then you will see a different echoes. Like, okay, so the FID signal initially you will see this, but later on as the spins are moving, so whenever they touch here, then it comes here. So again you apply with a delay 180-degree pulse, again it go back to the spins will be reversed, and then again you will see an echo. And as you can see here, likewise you will see different echoes signals in the entire the detector receiving coil, and this is an echo and this is an echo, and likewise you can see different echo. And then the intensity of these echoes also basically fade out with the time, with the delay. I told you that with the delay we are applying all these pulses. So if you try to draw a delay versus the intensity of the echoes, then that also intensity also will follow an exponential path. And this exponential path curve, if you try to fit it, that gives you the relaxation time constant T2. I hope I made it the point, and the corresponding text or the points are here. So anyway, you just go through it. And that is the spin echo technique. And as I told you that the NMR experiment, actual NMR experiment, we measure the FIDs, free induction decay profile of the system. Okay, and this is a time information, but from the time we don't get anything. But what we do, we use a mathematical software called Fourier transform, and then the Fourier transform convert the time information to the frequency information, and the frequencies are something that we can interpret to our system and then try to extract some information, right? So this Fourier transform actually gives you a nice relation which can be used for estimating the relaxation time, and also determine the resolution of the spectral NMR spectrometer. Okay, and the spectral line width are actually related with the relaxation times T2. Spectral line width are basically well connected with the spin relaxation time T2 by this relation. Okay, what is this delta mu half? What is this? Mu half is nothing but the full width at half maxima. It is also referred to as FWHM. FWHM is the full width at half maximum. Okay, so this is the maximum. One is the maximum. Sorry, at 0 you have a maximum. And according to this, full width at half maximum means that at 0.5 you have to draw a horizontal line, and then if you draw this line, this is the at 0.5, this is the line, so horizontal line. Now the spectrum, you have the spectral shape is like this, and then the width at the half maxima is basically is the line width, and this is actually related with the time constant T2 by that relation. So if you can actually measure the spectral line width, so NMR signals, even though we measure in terms of the frequency, we see frequencies, all those stuff, but actually they are the time information that you can convert it back based on the time by knowing the constants. And generally the resolution of the NMR spectrometer related with this constant, that is FWH of the peak, so that can be measured. Okay, and the T2 relaxation width is basically related by this. So this is nothing but the FWHM of the NMR signal. Simply you can remember like this: FWHM of the NMR signal that you are actually looking at. Okay, which is equal to 1 over pi T2. Okay, and in general, the NMR spectral lines are actually they look like a Lorentzian shape. Okay, Lorentzian shape, and the peak width are measured by a quantity that is the FWHM, right? And the FWHM is related with the spin-spin relaxation constant by this relation 1 over pi T2. And if you know the line width, then you can actually calculate the relaxation time. Okay, and what is the actual T2? I mean, what is the order of the T2? If you ask me, then well, it is of the order of few seconds. Okay, it is of the order of few seconds. From this, we can estimate the line width, NMR line width. Okay, NMR line width can be estimated, and typically they are of the order of 0.1 to 0.1 hertz and so on, based on the time constant. But in principle, that is possible that you can actually achieve very nice resolution by using this, by using any of the NMR spectrometers. So 0.1 hertz, 1 hertz and 0.1 hertz. So up to 0.1 hertz resolution nowadays it is achievable, and it's a nice instrument. So with a nice precision, we can actually precisely locate. And this line width smaller is better. Line width of the signal, it is smaller is better. Why? Because if it is occupying any signal, any spectral signal, if it is occupying huge space, that also compromise at the resolution the other side. Okay, resolution will be compromised the other side. As a result, if you have two signals which are very close by, it is difficult to resolve them properly. They will merge together if the spectral width is more. On the other hand, if the spectral width is smaller, and if they occupy very small region, that indicates that you can resolve the two different closely related signals very well, and then you can interpret the data in a better way. So always any spectroscopy technique that you may come across, the smaller the FWHM is better the resolution of the instrument. Here is also the same situation, and FWHM, that is half mu half delta mu half, has to be as a smaller value of delta mu half is preferred, and then the resolution, actually this comes to the discussion of the resolution. For signals in frequency domain, it is the deviation of the peak line shape from the standard Lorentzian thing. Suppose if you are dealing with the one particular frequency signal, NMR signal, and how the peak, if the peak is distorted if peak is shifted from the original position to some extent, how much it is basically shifted, that is actually tells you the resolution. And if it is a time signal, it is the exponential, it is the deviation from the FID. Okay. By definition, the resolution of NMR spectrometer is defined in two different ways. One is if it is a frequency domain thing that you are talking, and you can say it is the deviation. Resolution of NMR spectrometer is nothing but the deviation of the peak and that which also means the line shape from the standard Lorentzian peak. If it is shifting from the standard Lorentzian peak, and how much that is shifted, that how much it is deviated, that is basically is the resolution. On the other hand, if you're dealing with the time information, for example, the FID, then how much it is basically deviated, that is nothing but the resolution. Okay, so generally the resolution, as I pointed out in the previous slides also, the resolution of NMR spectrometer represented in terms of the FWHM. FWHM, so normally experiment it is done, and the spectrum is also represented frequency, and frequency you can just give the units of the resolutions, are you can take it as a units, the hertz. And in experiment wise, how do we measure? This is very important. Why? Because that certain times we have to do the calibration also the instrument, because that is related to the correctness of the instrument. So sometimes we measure and we calibrate the instrument. So how do you basically measure the resolution of the instrument? Well, it is measured by using a compound called 15% of the orthodichlorobenzene. You can take it as an example, dissolve in acetone and record the spectrum, NMR spectrum. If you record the spectrum, it gives, and then after recording the spectrum, you look at the protons of the benzene protons, and you just try to measure the resolution from that. I mean, measure in the sense that you have to measure the FWHM of the benzene protons, and that will basically tell you the resolution of that instrument. So typically this is how we measure, and when instrument is supplied, they will claim that okay, my instrument is this much resolution. So the NMR signals of a resolution 0.1 hertz or 0.5 hertz or 0.75 hertz I can measure. Okay, so the smaller is always better. So smaller number is always better. So people prefer the smaller one, and then so that number we can actually time to time calibrate, time to can cross check with over a period of time how the system is behaving, where is it is going wrong, or those informations we have to time we have to check it. For that reason only that this type of exercise is good. So if you want to check the correctness of your instrument and and how it is behaving time to time, so you just record the spectrum of orthodichlorobenzene and dissolve it in a D6, acetone D6, and record the spectrum, and afterwards those spectral line shapes you can try to compare it. Okay, so line full width at half maxima you can calibrate, you can basically measure and do this. Similarly, line shape also you can look at by measuring the chlorophyll in acetone D6. You can correct it. And just for your knowledge and information that how matters the resolution of a NMR spectrometer. Well, it is given example. So these are the NMR spectra of ethanol molecule. The upper one is considered the lower resolution NMR spectrometer. The lower one correspond to the high resolution NMR spectrometer. As you can see here, here you don't see the upper low resolution NMR spectrum. The peaks are broad, and then here, whereas here the peaks are short. Okay, the peaks are very sharp, and here the low resolution NMR spectrometers you can see, the higher resolution NMR spectrometer you can see here. For example, if you see here, this signal it is actually a combination of 4. There are 4 small tiny peaks are there. That means there is a splitting of this signal, which was actually absent in the low resolution NMR spectrum. Whereas here also the same thing, that here it is 3 different fine peaks are there, whereas here that information is missing. Okay, so high resolution and low resolution, here you don't get anything, just a broad. And then if you measure the half width, this is the half width, full width, this is a full width at half maximum of this one. This is huge. Whereas this one, is very small. Okay, that means in a small area you can accommodate so many peaks. That basically tells you the NMR spectrum is resolution is very good. Okay, so the splitting pattern of the compounds, will come to that later, but for the time being you can remember that high resolution instrument will have a smaller FWHMs. That means the resolution is good. Okay, whereas the lower ones will have high FWHMs. That means, so you cannot correlate the information, especially molecule which are having close chemical shift values. You cannot do the experiment with that type of thing using the low resolution NMR spectrometers.